Hello, class. I am coming to you with Chapter 7, but it's not going to be the PowerPoint for Chapter 7. I decided rather than following page after page of the PowerPoint, I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of what I simply know about learning and conditioning, which is the topic of the chapter. And then when I return to the classroom, we will be able to more quickly go through the PowerPoint because you will have learned some things that I'll be able to just move on faster because it's knowledge that you will have learned as of today. So, what you're looking at on the screen is a depiction of something that a scientist whose name is Ivan Pavlov did. He did it with his dogs. It was more than a dog. It was, I don't know exactly how many, but they depict one right here in this drawing. What is being depicted is his coming upon the concept, creating the concept, I guess I could say, of something called classical conditioning. He experimented with his dogs to see if he could get them to respond to a stimulus, which is simply a thing, but in behavioral science it's called a stimulus. Respond to that stimulus that normally would not have elicited a response because it meant nothing to the dogs. The point of his interest in finding out if the dogs would respond to this neutral stimulus would be then for him to pair that neutral thing, that neutral stimulus, that irrelevant thing, with a relevant thing that the dogs automatically respond to, which of course is food. In this example, in this particular experiment, it would be food. And he further wanted to discover if after X number of times of pairing irrelevant / neutral thing with relevant special thing, would he be able at some point to get his dogs to respond to previously irrelevant thing, even when that previously irrelevant thing was no longer being paired with relevant thing known as food. So, all that said, what you see there is that the dogs were hooked up to this apparatus and a little incision was made into their salivary gland, and this tubing that you see there is coming from the salivary gland, and the saliva is going down and being read by this pen recording on the cylinder there as to the increase or decrease of salivation. Okay, fine. You're probably wondering what the heck is salivation all about in this regard, in this experiment. What it was about was Pavlov wanting to see if the normal response to food, which of course that normal response is salivation, and he of course measured the typical amount of salivation in anticipation of food, would that roughly same, if not exactly same, amount of salivation occur when something else other than food would be presented to the dogs, because the dogs would have at that point gotten used to this non-food thing being presented. Thus, they anticipated that food would follow it because it had been following it for a number of presentations, a number of times, and so the dogs salivated to the same degree they were used to salivating to the anticipation of food. They could smell food on its way, and would, their gastrointestinal systems would prepare itself for ingesting of food. Okay, that's the introduction to what the chapter in part is about, which is classical conditioning. All right, with that in mind, we're going to cover the necessary response, or I'm sorry, the necessary vocabulary. But just before we cover the necessary vocabulary, it's a good idea for me to first cover what that thing was that I was referring to that got paired with food, that the dogs learned that when they heard that thing, it meant I'm about to get food, thus happy, happy, thus salivary glands activate, okay? So, looking at the screen, the thing was a bell. So, before being conditioned, before the dogs were conditioned that the bell could carry a meaning, and a good meaning, food is on its way, before all of that happened, the bell would ring, that is, Pavlov would ring this bell, and as you can see, the dogs didn't respond. Who cares? It's a noise, okay? Noise has no meaning. Bell noise has no meaning. So, the no meaning sounding of the bell, but food, when it was presented, brought about salivation. Now, don't let the letters be a problem. Don't think math stuff, okay? Don't think algebra stuff. Just know that the U.S. stands for food, and the U.S. stands for the words unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned stimulus. And I'm going to explain that when we get to the vocabulary shortly. So hang with me. So the unconditioned stimulus led to an unconditioned response, a UR. And the UR was salivation. Okay. That was the norm prior to the dogs being conditioned that the bell could have a good meaning. Now, the next thing that's happening is Pavlov is conditioning them to respond to the bell. You see there, the bell is the CS, which stands for conditioned stimulus. And that conditioned stimulus was immediately followed by the presentation of food, which is an unconditioned stimulus, which then led to the unconditioned response of salivation. And then finally, after the dogs had received this pairing for a number of times, bell plus food, bell plus food, bell plus food, getting used to bell meaning here comes food, thus salivating to bell is what happened in the final process of conditioning the dogs. So it therefore shows that is exactly what is happening in that last line there, where the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, brought about salivation in the dogs. So, with those pictures in mind, here we go with looking at the vocabulary, if I can figure out how to zoom in. Yes, I think there is a way. Just a second here. All right. It's a little too wide there. Let me see here if I can help it a little bit. And some of this you might just have to be stuck with listening because of the positioning that I'm still learning how to do here. So in part on the screen what you can see, but what it totally says is that classical conditioning is changing instinctual responses, that which is innate, that which is not learned, that which you are born with. Changing instinctual responses to that to which we instinctually respond, causing us to learn to have a response to something that we didn't normally respond to. Let me try this again to back it out a little bit. Well, I didn't want to do it that way, did I? All right, that's a bit better there. Crooked, but now straight. So, an unconditioned stimulus is that which elicits or causes or brings out an inborn or innate response from an organism. So, an innate, unconditioned stimulus is food. Brand newborn babies respond to the smell of milk, and their salivary glands immediately prepare them, and hopefully immediately they are receiving breast milk is likely what'll be happening, but at least milk, breast, or formula. Okay? So the unconditioned stimulus wording is simply that which we automatically respond to. Okay, next. All right. The UR, the unconditioned response, is the automatic, instinctual, natural, innate. I'm just thinking of all the words that are synonyms. They mean the same thing. But your natural responds to something that you don't have to be taught to respond to. So it's called unconditioned because you don't have to get trained. You don't have to learn, be taught that you should respond to breast milk. I mean, you just come into the world knowing to do that. Next. So, a conditioned stimulus does have to be learned. The organism has to be taught. So, a conditioned stimulus was the bell in the case of Pavlov's dogs, because they had to be learned or programmed to respond to a stimulus that is not, naturally going to bring about a response. Prior, however, to that stimulus becoming conditioned, it was neutral. So we're going to look at both of those at the same time. So the conditioned response is what we're looking at next. The conditioned response is a natural response to an unnatural or previously neutral stimulus. So the conditioned response of salivation was the result of salivation happening just at the sound of the bell prior to the receiving of food. So the neutral stimulus had at first, the bell had at first been the neutral stimulus, but it no longer can be the neutral stimulus once the dogs learned that it meant food is on the way. However, because the bell is a neutral stimulus that they learned to expect something good to happen, thus it became the conditioned stimulus, extinction can happen. That is, the responding to the bell isn't permanent forever into the future for the dogs if the bell at some point is still being presented, but food is not still being presented. So extinction is the result of bell, no food. Well, I'm going to salivate because I thought there was going to be food. Second time, bell, no food, So the dogs start, fool me once, fool me twice, You're not going to keep fooling me, right? So at a point in time, extinction is no longer, is the bell a conditioned stimulus. It doesn't bring about a conditioned response of salivation until something called spontaneous recovery happens. So spontaneous recovery happens when, in the case of the experiment, Pavlov started the pairing again. And obviously, the first time they heard the bell and they had gotten used to there isn't going to be food with bell, I'm sure there was no salivation. However, when food did get presented a few seconds after the bell, the dogs were, of course, spontaneously recovering from disappointment, from expectation of food, thus there is no salivation. With spontaneous recovery, salivation resumes. However, with that, spontaneously recovering, because now bell is conditioned stimulus again, if he tried that, and he did, Pavlov tried that whole thing again, and at a point in time, the recovery was less and slower and lasted, it extinguished, went into extinction, which means extinguished, more quickly. Again, fool me once, fool me twice, but you can't keep tricking me here, Okay, next term that we need to learn is stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization is when a neutral stimulus is learned, but another closely similar stimulus is also experienced. It is initially easy to, let me move this up so that it's not, my face is not in the way of what you're trying to see. All right. So, to give you an example of stimulus generalization, and this is on your extra credit work for this chapter. This chapter, by the way, comes with extra credit if you choose to do it. Okay. Stimulus generalization, I'll take it straight from the extra credit exercise, is little 3-year-old Mary, Susie, learns the sound of the ice cream truck, let's say. She has her first summer of the ice cream truck coming down the street that she remembers, because maybe it may or may not have happened the previous year, but she was only 2, and let's just say she didn't pay attention. So now she hears this bell, she learns that that's the ice cream man, the ice cream truck, and, she gets treated to ice cream, and so happy. Okay, she witnesses this from time to time over the course of the summer. Now, fast forward. It's next summer, and she's 4 years old now, and she hears a bell. However, the bell is the sound of the church bell ringing, and let's just say it's a new church that's been built since last summer, and so she hadn't been used to hearing it, but she does hear it now, and she believes that that bell is the ice cream truck. And Mom explains to little Susie that no, it's the church bell. Okay, what that is all about is stimulus generalization. So the stimulus of the ice cream truck bell gets generalized to cover all similar sounding things to little Susie's ears, she is not yet able to discern the difference. She is therefore in the development point of stimulus generalization. But that lasts only until she learns, next terminology here, she learns stimulus discrimination. Stimulus discrimination is when she learns the difference between ice cream truck bell and church bell, and for that matter, any other bell kinds of noises. She understands to discriminate, discern the difference. There was an experiment, by the way, with dogs with regard to stimulus generalization and discrimination, where they were treated when they could discern the difference between notes, sounds of notes on the piano, when they would correctly tap their paw on middle C, as opposed to before that, any key would be tapped by a human being, and they would respond as though it was the right note. But at a point, they learned the right from the wrong note, and they would respond accordingly. Moving on now, that's the big picture of classical conditioning for now until we go through the PowerPoint when I'm back with you in class. So the next part of Chapter 7 that we're going to look at today is moving away from classical conditioning to something called operant conditioning. So, okay, I see that's a little high there. Okay. All right. Classical conditioning, once again, has to do with the response of an organism. Let's just talk about humans, not all organisms, but okay. That's the language that behaviorism uses, is organisms, but okay. We know we're largely interested in human behavior. So the instinctual, automatic, inborn behavior being conditioned is what classical conditioning is about. Whereas operant conditioning has nothing to do with instincts and what you're born with. Operant conditioning has to do with changing behavioral responses. There are these four terms that are important for you, excuse me, to learn, and more terms in addition that I'll talk about. But you're going to learn about reinforcement, punishment, shaping, and latent learning. With regard to reinforcement, it is designed to get the child to keep doing good, productive behaviors. And punishment is, of course, to curb or stop unproductive behavior. Shaping is trial and error approach leading to learning, but it kind of happens by accident. Finally, latent learning is the kind of learning that is dependent upon the frequency of effort. Okay, that might be foreign language, but it won't be for very long. So backing up to say much more about reinforcement and about punishment. Let me see, I need to back this up here. It's a bit too much, right? All right. So what you're looking at is showing you that there are two ways to reinforce good behavior to keep it going, and there are two ways to extinguish, get rid of, stop bad behavior. Okay, the row across the top is it's about the positive, and then the row across the bottom is about the negative. All right, positive reinforcement. So reinforcement is the first column, punishment is the second column. So reinforcement, Susie cleaned her room, Johnny took out the trash, wonderful. Mom wants to keep that behavior going. Dad, likewise, wants to keep that behavior going. So, they can keep it going one of two ways. They can do it with positive reinforcement or with negative reinforcement, but the thing that's going to typically get you confused until you can wrap your head around it, don't think of positive and negative from the viewpoint of positive means good, negative means bad. It does not. It does not mean that in this instance of operant conditioning. Positive means the child receives a good thing, a reward. Negative means the child doesn't have to have a unwanted thing happen to them, such as a chore, a task of some kind, something that they, because they've done a good thing and I want to keep that behavior going, thus I am reinforcing it to keep it going. I might say to Susie, because you've kept your room clean all week, I'm going to take away your needing to wash dishes for tonight or 2 nights or whatever appropriate reinforcement, negative reinforcement I might choose to give her, but negative is taking something away. Positive is giving something. So to negatively reinforce is to keep good behavior going by removing something from your duties, your life, that you are glad to not have to have, okay? So moving over to punishment. Punishment is the same idea. Positive doesn't mean good and negative doesn't mean bad. It's adding something or taking something away. So if a child is being positively punished, a child is receiving a discipline, a consequence for not good behavior. The child might receive a timeout. A child might receive, if the offense is horrible enough, they might have to receive an appropriate kind of spanking. The child might have to receive not only their ongoing chore duty, but they might have to do their sister or their brother's ongoing duty for a period of time, because in any event, something is being received under positive punishment, that I want to stop that behavior. Negative punishment, also, I want to stop that behavior, but I'm taking something away to drive home a point. So the favorite toy gets taken away, the play date gets taken away, etc. Favorite television program, you don't get to watch it for X amount of times or days or what have you. Okay? So you're getting the drift. Positive, something is added. Negative, something is removed. Reinforcement, keep up the good work, atta girl. Punishment, that's not good. We can't have that in this family. We can't have that in this house. It's not good for you, Johnny. You know. All right. That's so far so good. But still under the topic of operant conditioning, we're going to look at the topic of something called shaping. Let's see here. The only thing you're missing out of the picture is that right there, the effects of shaping. But I need to move it up as much as I can to get as much in the picture as I can, but yet keep it close enough for you to read it. So, and I'll move it down when I need to. But let's start with the top here. The effects of shaping is demonstrated with the Skinner box, B.F. Skinner, one of the fathers of behaviorism, created this box, made this box, and into the box he put a rat. And the rat, at first, as you can see there, by the way, the point of putting the rat in the box was to see how long it would take the rat to discover how to find food. The food was up at the top of the box, and there was a lever down there on the floor of the box that the rat could get to, and if the rat pressed the lever, down would drop a morsel of food. But of course the rat's not aware of that. He's just in the box. So as you can see there, the first session inside the box, the majority of the time the rat is doing, in order of appearance there, those things. So the majority of time he's exploring, and then he's stiffing, and it's only at the very end of that first session he accidentally presses the lever and down comes food. But because it's accidental, now I'm going to move this up that you can see what's going on at the bottom of this page here. So, because that was an accident, he didn't realize how he got the food. He was just happy that he got the food. And because he got the food, now he spends 9 more sessions. It's not until the 10th session that he finally figures out exactly what that lever does, because he finally figures out that's where the food's coming from. So he's been getting food at some point with the previous sessions, but never exactly 100% sure of how he's getting the food. But finally things click in the 10th effort. Finally things click, and he goes straight for, the wonderful thing that is giving him the food. And I'm going to give you human application to this, which is what it's ultimately, the experiment was ultimately about in the first place. But before I do that, something closely akin to that experiment, but the only difference is, what I'm about to show you, is the difference. Okay, the Skinner box was going through life, making whatever strides and forward movements that we make just by accident without any guidance, okay? If whatever good comes out of a life, it's done just by trial and error. That's the bottom line point to hold in your mind for right now, while we now look at something called latent learning. Okay, latent learning. Now, what we're looking at here is a very interesting experiment where 3 groups of mice were sent through a maze. Or let me put it differently. It's not so much that it was 3 groups. It was just a bunch of mice put through a maze. However, they were in this maze excuse me, for a total of 17 days. You can't totally see that because of my face being in the way. Let me just move it up for a moment. Okay, so 17 days is how long their efforts took. It's not that they were in there 17 days straight, as much as it is that during each of the 17 days, their movement toward either the right direction or the wrong direction were either rewarded or not rewarded. That's the point. Moving back down here so you can see it again. So, what you are looking at, which is what causes this to ultimately be 3 groups of rats, is you see wording there whereby one group of rats never got food reinforcement, another group always got food reinforcement. Finally, the third group finally got it after 11 days of effort. Furthermore, the point of this is to show you. Notice, on day 17, where each of the 3 groups ended. And by the way, what's on the left axis, the y-axis, is number of mistakes, number of errors, starting with day 1 all the way down to day 17. Okay, so on day 1, the orange group of rats, as you can see on that left axis, the y-axis, on day 1, the orange rats have, let's just say, 26 errors on day 1. On that same day, the purple group of rats as well as the blue group of rats had a same number, and that, let's just call it, would be maybe 24 errors. So it's not that big of a difference between 2 groups making 24 mistakes, finding their way through the maze, versus one group with 26 mistakes. Okay, about the same, more or less. But what gets interesting is applicable to human beings. What gets interesting is the purple group, that middle group there, where the words are pointing to the fact that that group never got food reinforcement. They just had to fight their way through life, as it were, without ever being given a kudo or a pat on the back or an atta-girl or an atta-boy, just fighting their way through life. Well, the result of that group was the worst result, because you can see that by day 17, even they had learned to make fewer mistakes in life. Thus, they started out on day 1 with, let's just call it 24, and ended up on day 17 with what looks to be 16 or 17 errors. So they had made an improvement just by sheer willpower, okay? But the next group, which is the purple group, they got food reinforcement after more than halfway through life, because I don't want to talk rats, I want to talk people. So I'm talking life, not maze. Of course, you know, life can be a maze, but you get the point. So after more than halfway through life, because half of 17 days would be 8.5 days, right? But these people didn't get a pat on the back until more than halfway through life, on the 11th day of life, the 11th year of life, the 11th whatever of life. You can get my drift here. They finally get encouragement. They finally get reinforcement. Look what happens when that happened. When they got that, just before they got that food reinforcement, which in the case of the rats was day 11, they were making fewer mistakes. So they were hunkering down and trying, because everybody wants to be the best they can be. So even without food for 10 days, they were making fewer errors also. And they were making maybe 15 errors a day. But when they got food, when they got the pat on the back, when they got the words of support and praise, they dropped dramatically in the number of errors they made. The errors looked to be around 5 or 6 a day versus 15-ish a day, because they were told, you're doing a good job. And they had been hungry. Their little egos had been hungry. People are hungry for support and feedback and encouragement and praise and unconditional positive regard. And you can see, therefore, that each day thereafter, because they are now getting food reinforcement, they are making, ultimately, out of all 3 groups, the least number of errors in life by the end of their development, let's just call it, when we're talking human beings, not rats. And finally, we've got our 3rd group, who always got food, never had to sweat it, never had to wonder, always got food, no matter how many mistakes. Here you go, baby. I'll give you a reward. You might not be trying as hard as you could, but here you go. That group of people ended up better off than the ones who never got a pat on the back or a word of encouragement or guidance. They're way better than that group, but they're not as good, doing as well in life as the group who waited forever and finally got it. The kid who grew up in abuse, the kid who was neglected, the kid who was always criticized by caregivers rather than supported. They paid attention to what the kid did wrong and didn't support the kid as much when they did something right. Well, that group is happy campers, because maybe they got taken out of that abusive, neglectful, critical situation. Maybe they got adopted by a far more healthy household. Maybe they were taken in by, grandparents, maybe whatever, but you get the drift. They were introduced to a much better setting in life, as a result of which they became more optimistic, trying harder, thus becoming most successful over the pampered ones, the blue ones, and over the pitiful ones who just had to fend for themselves all through life. So all of that falls under the category of being operantly conditioned. And so on that score, on that note, you've learned enough now that when I get back into the classroom with you, understanding the PowerPoint and the point of the chapter will be much simpler to accomplish. So that's it for now.